the podcast for unlocking potential by and with Uli Vogel. A very warm welcome to everyone joining us for today's episode. Dear listener, which features a somewhat eye-catching and intriguing title. How do I unleash my potential and get the most out of myself? The connection to our podcast's title is, of course, obvious. Here it's made really explicit, and we want to take a closer look at it in a very fundamental way. My colleague Fabian has also prepared this very nicely to help us pull out some definitions. And of course, I'll add my own experiences so far to the mix. So, I'd like to start by saying that a lot of people definitely want to get more out of themselves. Ideally, they would like to. These people really want to maximize their potential. But there are others as well. So, in a way, a lot of people aren't really that interested in discovering and developing their potential. And in my opinion, the key lies in education, that maybe they're just not made aware enough of the opportunities and the potential they have. That lie dormant, and that brings me to a somewhat bleak observation. We don't have any shortage of talent in our society. That's the positive part, but the bleak part is, we're just not really managing to fully tap into that potential. And I think there's room for improvement for all of us there. That's why, in this podcast episode, I'm talking about the topic of developing potential, which for me means, first of all, even recognizing it, maybe even before that. First I have to know that something like potential exists, then I have to recognize it, then ultimately I have to address it in order to develop it. So, potential, what does it actually mean, and how can I at least get a little bit more out of myself? So, what are the snippets like, the structure? How is it set up? It's simple. I start off with the definition and meaning of developing potential. And then, in a second part, I'll look at how it actually works. How can I practically do that? I hope I've got a few tips for you that will help you out. And yes, of course, I'll also wrap things up with a conclusion in a third, short part. There are also a few references to literature in the show notes. And we'll make sure to include those in the show notes as well. So, let's do that. All right, let's get started with the first part. 1. Definition and meaning. So, what does developing potential actually mean? The basic definition of the term potential is the ability or possibility of a person, an object, a situation, or a constellation, in my view, to develop, that is, to change positively, to grow, or to achieve a certain performance. That's a very general definition. Of course, there are all sorts of different perspectives on this. Ultimately, it depends on that. For example, it could be about motivational potential, developmental potential, reconciliation potential between different parties, collaboration potential, or synergy potential. Especially when it comes to collaboration, I always refer to the mathematical proof of cooperation. When individuals have different qualities, abilities, and strengths that they can use in certain combinations, if I put all of that into one pool, meaning several people contribute their inherent potentials and strengths, then the number of strengths and abilities available to solve the challenge increases, and so does the number of possible combinations. That's why, even in cooperation itself, it's mathematically inherent that there is potential to be unlocked here. From a developmental psychology perspective, potential refers to the abilities, talents, and possibilities a person has to develop over the course of their life. And by now, after a lot of experience, I've seen it all. So there are some people, maybe already in their mid-20s or only in their mid-20s, who already have, in quotation marks, a concrete crust on their heads, are so set in their ways, unfortunately never really enlightened or put on the right educational track, that they can't even recognize it. And then there are old, really old people who are incredibly active and still keep going. They continue to develop their potential. I'll just mention the philosopher here. Jürgen Habermas. I think he's nearly 100 now, and he's still publishing. And it's really good to read his work and to listen to him as well. So, in the end, it's actually independent of age. Of course, in general, it's true that younger people tend to be more proactive about it, but I still want to emphasize that, as a society, it's really in our hands. There's a lot we can make possible here. And again, as I said, education is the key. So, potential is understood here as the ability to continue developing. And if you use a very official definition of the term potential according to the Diagnostics and Testing Board, this refers to the context of aptitude or personnel diagnostics, which is also our field. It means the ability of a person to handle tasks that are unfamiliar to them so far and to develop further competencies. So, in a way, it's about searching something not yet familiar, not yet known, so I have to look for something accordingly, which is also our clear company claim, explore your potential. And ultimately, you can do that right up until your last day. And for that, you need a certain curiosity to say, yeah, what else is in there? What else is behind it? And ultimately, potentials are one of the 3 types of suitability characteristics, alongside qualifications, which you acquire in terms of knowledge with certificates and diplomas, and competencies, which are a bit more advanced. So, those are learned, repeatable behaviors and accessible bodies of knowledge for successfully handling professional tasks. That simply means that just attending the course alone is of no use. I also have to apply what I've learned and internalize it to some extent so that I can repeat it. Only then does it actually become a competency. And when it comes to potential assessments, it's ultimately about how well people who are new to a job or inexperienced in a certain activity can, through further qualification, actually perform that job. So, what can I actually achieve with it? And does the person have what's needed to perform the behavior? Can they acquire the necessary knowledge and skills to the required extent and within the available time? And then, of course, there's always the question of willingness. For us, it's the diamond in profiling values, the attention that you ultimately has for each trait or for the specific knowledge. So, it's always about knowledge, ability, and then also willingness. The 3-step process. And of course, you have to take age into account, different developmental maturity processes, but above all, in my opinion, also imprinting, education, and, yes, social influence as well. So, we can have a really positive impact if we, no matter what circles we're in, get things started and push things forward accordingly. So, sometimes we have more opportunities than we think. To have a positive, contagious effect in terms of developing potential. So, that's it for the definition and significance. First step. Second step, developing potential. So, how does that work now? And unfortunately, I have to say right up front, there's no magic formula for suddenly getting better at everything. But there are a few approaches you can use to further develop and nurture your strengths. And yes, I often use this in profiling, in feedback discussions, because we already have a scale, or rather, a value perspective, that we work out. This is that whole self-efficacy thing. In casual terms, I like to call it the KVP gene. So, KVP stands for Continuous Improvement Process. It's a term from lean management in the technical industry, used to keep getting better. But there are people who, in my opinion, just have this gene in them. That means you always want to better understand what you're doing, how you're doing it, how you can improve, and you're constantly striving to get your personal best out of yourself. That's what I call the KVP gene. And that has to do with self-efficacy, but also with what's called the internal locus of control, In other words, I believe that if I make changes or improvements within myself, then I have the ability to shape things and create an environment where I can move forward and act with more influence. So, as I said, there's no magic formula, but there are a few approaches for how. Strengths can generally be further developed and encouraged quite well. And I've actually prepared 5 steps for this. Let's dive into the very first step, which is called brainstorming. First, we need to get clear about what's actually inside us. So the basic question is, what are your personal qualities, abilities, and strengths? We just go about our daily lives as usual, but we rarely ask ourselves that question directly. And Hartman put it very nicely in his 4 steps to self-development, calling the first step Know Yourself, that is, looking inside yourself to find out what's actually there. He even calls it, quite literally, the material within you that can have an impact. So, the question is, what do you often get positive feedback for? And what don't you get positive feedback for? So, it's really important to be realistic here. No wishful thinking, no castles in the air. Yeah, I'd love to, I don't know, play basketball in the NBA in the States one day. That just doesn't make sense, especially not at my age. So, it's also about knowing what isn't inside you. Be sure to ask your family, friends, colleagues, and supervisors about this as well. We really don't ask enough questions anyway. We don't ask for feedback enough either. But this feedback shouldn't always just be about where I'm really strong. It could also be, where don't you see me, where can't I develop as much? And I think both sides should always be looked at enough here. That's the first step, brainstorming. The second step, which I think is really nice, is imagination. So, visualizing your best performance. Think about it. In what situation did you feel really great and afterwards were truly proud of yourself? So, when did you really feel like, yes, that was really good, I was able to contribute, I was effective, and listen to yourself in those moments? And my communications and rhetoric coach once put it really nicely for me. And maybe that's a good analogy. When you're preparing for a talk, a keynote, or something like that, make sure to visualize beforehand as well. That means, think carefully, this is the end of your talk. You've performed amazingly. And what kind of feeling is that now? And then comes the applause. And you realize, wow, that really went over well. And you can actually condition yourself with that. So, visualizing your best performance is really important. We humans have the ability, we have the imagination to picture these things. And that imagination helps us figure out what we're good at, what ultimately does us good, and what doesn't. About human imagination. Probably the most imaginative creature on this planet, I always like to recommend Yuval Noah Harari, who really explored this in detail in his book Sapiens. So, point 2, visualize your best performance. Point 3, here, for developing your potential, is to look deeper and recognize your motivators. Yeah, what drives you to give your best? What is it? Is it money? Is it recognition? Is it enjoying your work? Is it feedback from people, or maybe the opportunity for self-fulfillment? I believe the benefit to others should really be front and center. I think that whole Scrooge McDuck image doesn't really work. Money, that's also. It's actually been studied a lot and is really more of a hygiene factor, and only has a short-term effect, not a long-term one. But ultimately, if we look at companies, Hartman puts it nicely and says, companies exist for people, not the other way around, people for companies. But if companies are there for people, then they have to provide some benefit to people. And that's what I mean by the benefit argument with the motivators, also for me personally, the value I create for others. That should be at the center. And that's the human value dimension that we have here. I become myself through you. I think about the other person, about what I can offer them to make things better for them, but by using my own strengths. And from that comes the reward, that I also get something in return. And if I do it really well, then I get a lot out of it too. And maybe in this area I'll be very successful, and maybe I'll also make a lot of money. Yeah, it's all good. If you have a lot, then of course you should give back and donate. Like it's much more common in Anglo-Saxon countries than it is here, that you give back to society. So in that sense, I think for me, this is the basic, fundamental reason. Actually, the motivation is already about benefiting others and using my strengths, so that I specifically put my unique horsepower on the road, so to speak, for us as humanity. Ultimately, it's also been said that the meaning of life in general is to enrich the universe and not to pollute it. And we've had a lot of criminals in this world, and there are still some, or even worse characters. The rulers, accordingly, are the ones who pollute the universe rather than enrich it. And that's why it's so important to recognize these motivators for yourself. What drives me, I think, is really important in order to purposefully advance your potential development. And the fourth point out of the 5 is to know your needs. So, what kind of framework or conditions do I need? What do you need in order to change in the best possible way? To bring into your job or into whatever it is you do. It's not just about your job, it could also be your hobby. Or within the context of your social involvement, so that you can really put your horsepower on the road there, too. So, what do you need? Which conditions are important here? And I've already seen tens of thousands of profiles and conducted feedback discussions. And so on. And you know, for example, that in large corporations, banks, health insurance companies, and so on, people are wired a bit differently. They need more structure, policies, and organizational design. Compared to many others who want to be agile and fast in small teams, like a gazelle on the move. Or there are plenty of people who simply have such a strong desire for freedom that they want to become entrepreneurs. On their own. Wanting to make decisions, wanting to have freedom, just like it is for me, for example. And that's not good or bad. It's really a question of needs and the circumstances, which thankfully are different for everyone. Otherwise, we wouldn't have such diversity in society and in the workplace. So, listen to yourself. What are your needs? What are your circumstances? And then, in a 5th step, I wrap up by asking, okay, how do I transfer these strengths into my professional life? What characteristics or requirements would your current or future job need to have in order to ideally match your strengths, motivators, and needs? And here I like to say, take a look at this possible role, so, when we transfer it to your professional life, from 3 different perspectives. That's the brain, hand, and heart perspective. So, the fundamental, the practical, and also the human aspect. So, if we start with the brain in this case, does this professional role even make strategic sense for your life purpose and your life goals? Is the context right? Key words, small or large company, industry, whatever it may be. So here, letting these fundamental considerations and reason prevail is the brain perspective. The second is the hand perspective, asking yourself, honestly, what do I actually want to do on an operational level? Where does my hands-on work actually begin? Where does it end? Where is it clearly defined or limited? So, it's important to also think about this hand perspective. What do I definitely not want to do? What could I maybe delegate? What is it exactly that I'm really good at? And then, of course, not to forget the heart perspective or the heart-gut perspective. What do I actually need in order to be able to emotionally identify with it? What kind of atmosphere is necessary? What kind of culture? What kind of quality should a supervisor maybe have so that to actually create that heartfelt connection, the one that really gets things moving? So, just try to use these insights to come up with an ideal, results-oriented job description. What kind of working hours, tasks, ways of working together, team, and so on would it need? Why are you doing this? How are you doing it? What exactly are you doing there? By asking yourself these questions, you can really nurture and further develop the potential you already have. Maybe this 5-step process will help you. I'll say it again, brainstorm what's inside me, what isn't. Second, visualize your best performance to really immerse yourself and see, to verify a bit, is this right, does it fit? Third, identify your motivators. What's ultimately behind that? What are my drivers? Fourth, know your needs, the conditions you require. I need these in order to really perform at my best and, finally, to make the transfer. Fifth, transfer your strengths into your professional life. Third point, my conclusion. I believe that human willpower is crucial in this context. Of course, I have to go through. First, education needs to make us aware that there is potential and that we can do something about it. But I also think there are a lot of people who have the education and still don't do it. And here, to quote Viktor Frankl, we have the choice in how we respond to what comes at us in the world. Whether we really let ourselves be affected by it, whether we take matters into our own hands creatively or not. And those are our personal values. They play a very, very significant role. What is truly important to me, and making use of our lifetime, every day is, so to speak, crucial. If things go well, we have about 30,000 days in our lives. That goes by faster than you think. The sun always rises and sets. But it's been doing that for much, much longer than those 30,000 days. It's just the blink of an eye, if you will. And still, it's important to make the most of every moment here. And the human will, the drive to get something out of life, I think that's what really matters. And if you have that will, then that's fantastic. Contribute to not only developing yourself further, but also to passing on that drive. Inspiring others with it, I think that's also a really, really important point. Yeah, I'm glad you stuck around until the end. I'd be absolutely thrilled if you rated the podcast on Spotify and shared it on LinkedIn too. If you follow us, join us on our journey and give us feedback. It was really nice recording this episode for you, and I'm looking forward to us connecting again soon, somewhere else. Bye for now.